Okay, we are back. Thank you, everybody. We are back. We will now move on to item 3 this evening, which is the consent calendar. We have one consent calendar item this evening, and that is to approve the Planning Commission minutes from our September 27th regular meeting.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
We have a
I second.
motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion carries. And at this point in the meeting, we're going to move on to business items. Our main business item on the agenda this evening is the Gateway Area Plan. And however, before we get a staff report, I wanted to take an opportunity to talk briefly about the Rga proposal, which is something that we've discussed at many prior meetings. We do have in our packet this evening a further iteration of the Rga proposals for how this kind of a process could work. And I want to note a couple of things. One is that much of the mapping exercise that we're going to do this evening is going to allow us to dig in specifically to the list of issues that the Rga solutions propose to help us work on. So there will be some more discussion about it in our gateway discussion this evening. But the place I wanted to emphasize, because I think we could kind of dispense with this, is that I noticed that the hybrid option of 2 and 3 as proposed by Rga maps very strongly over a proposal that I made the last time we talked about this Rga, which is along the lines of their proposal. What I said specifically was that we would have individual specialists that would come and talk to us on issues that we feel like we need more help with, and that we could also further down the road in this process for either for issues for whatever reason that we may want to utilize the topic working group. Given that I feel like there's, from my perspective, we're largely in alignment, I just wanted to see if there was anyone on the Planning Commission that would be willing to make a motion that we pursue that pathway, and then at least we'll have an agreement about how we're going to approach this Rga proposal, and we could then move on to discussing the gateway issue this evening.
So I'd like to see if we could hear from the planning commissioners that are here before we do that, just to explore if there were other ideas.
And Scott, for clarification, was it option 4, the hybrid of 2 and 3 that you were?
Yeah, in prior iterations, it was called option 4. This evening's packet has it just listed as a hybrid option of 2 and 3. And again, I think that maps really strongly over the proposal I made, that we utilize individual specialists where the Planning Commission feels that's important, and also incorporate topic working groups at some point further in the process for issues that we decide a topic working group would be appropriate. And again, given the fact that there's at least from my perspective, a lot of correlation between their proposal and my proposal, I wanted to see if there was anyone else that felt, in agreement with that, so that we could perhaps get a motion and move on to discussing other issues.
I'm all for, particularly the hybrid model that I see here, and we clearly need individual specialists. That's come up. We're heading that direction, it feels. The working group idea needs a lot more clarity, like, and, this is what I'd like to discuss is, what does it look like? Who picks that working group? Are they vetted through us? Are they vetted through the staff? I don't know. And exactly how do we get that group chosen in a timely manner? And then what are the exact questions that those groups would take on? And that's something that I guess we'll also have to discuss, and how do we vet those questions so that there's very specific assignments.
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. One is, I think if we can get a motion that this is how we're going to approach it, then we would bring this back as an item to specifically talk about how we would incorporate working groups. But I think the mapping exercise we're going to do later this evening is going to give us a lot more information about what issues that are on the list of questions that we have, as well as the community, might need either an individual specialist or a working group. I think we'll have more clarity at the other end of the exercise we're going to do this evening. But my hope would be that if we could at least say, yes, we like this option, then we could bring it back to flesh out some of the details at a later date. Judith?
Yeah, one thing that I'm not at all clear about and that we would need to discuss is what would the working groups work on, and what would their relationship to the Planning Commission itself be? I'm especially concerned about quasi-public, quasi-ad hoc efforts that would tie the Planning Commission into advice or de facto decisions that are made beyond the scope of the Brown Act. And if it is material that would be subject to the Brown Act, that's going to require city staff, and therefore resources that that are right now quite beyond the scope of what it appears we would have relatively rapid access to. I think that there's an enormous potential for members of the public, organizations of members of the public, to organize to provide advice as detailed as they want to, and to ask the city to provide them with the expertise that they may need to then provide us with that advice. But I'm concerned about a hybrid of public accountable process and ad hoc processes that would potentially lead us into not only conflicts of interest, but in effect, a long way toward decisions made behind closed doors off the record. One of the things that I really value about the Planning Commission process is that it is all on the record. It is all public, even if you don't like the broadness of the agenda items. We don't talk to each other behind anyone's back. We're not allowed to. And I'm sure if we could, we would very efficiently be able to mobilize lots of advice from a lot of people and bring it into this room. So I am not super excited about voting on the RGA hybrid option at this time, because I don't know what it would look like, and there's some versions of what it would look like that to me would fly in the face of what I want the Planning Commission to be involved with.
So I was wanting to know if we could put that off till we have, because we're missing two of our planning commissioners, our chair and John.
If I could make a process suggestion,
Please.
because I think that the exercise that we have planned for tonight will flesh out a lot of the issues that were raised. In fact, part of what we're trying to do tonight is to identify, concerns that have been raised by the public. And so, we were, we took all of the items that were on that list and included them. So you have an opportunity to talk about them specifically, in that context. And so maybe, coming back at the end of this meeting and thinking through that again, what that looks like after you've run through that exercise and decided, well, does this issue, seem like it needs a working group? Or does this issue need, more information from a specialist, so on and so forth? The other thing I wanted to mention was, I think that, the opportunities for solution sets in today's exercise to address the concerns that we the community and the Planning Commission are raising, we should evaluate all of them. There may be some solution sets that some recommendations for solutions that are too expensive or outside our capacity to do, but I think it's fine to have them on the table to consider, and then that way we can make the decision. Again, in public, a transparent decision as to whether or not that's, a study that we can do, or that's an expert that we can bring, or, if it violates the Brown Act. And I do see that the Planning Commission is being in the driver's seat of those particular decisions when they arise, how the subcommittees are formed, and how they're used, and how that information is brought back into the public discourse.
At some point in this evening's meeting, I wouldn't mind hearing from whoever would represent the RGA group in describing what they have in mind in this hybrid option. What I've got here is one piece of paper. And I would like to hear from the folks who put that piece of paper together what they actually have in mind in proposing it to us, or whatever else they feel that we should put into our decision process as suggestions, so that we can think those things through and evaluate them.
Well, I think if we're not at a point where we could make a motion regarding this proposal, my preference would be that we move into the mapping exercise, because again, it's going to give us a lot more detail about which issues may need a working group or specialists, or that alternatively we feel comfortable with as is. So, Christian, we haven't heard from you. Do you, what's your take on the status of the RGA proposal, and whether we're ready to make a decision about it, or you'd like to hear more information in our discussion this evening?
I would like to hear more information from our discussion this evening, and go forward with this mapping out the concerns that have been brought to the commission in the RGA proposal, and also items that are of concern to my fellow commissioners, and anything that may come up this evening in public comment.
Okay, so given that, let's. Sure.
I agree with Judith that I would like to hear at least a abbreviated presentation. I know that they've put a lot of time in it, and I feel like we should at least give the due diligence of hearing at least part of it. And I also love the idea of what David said of doing this mapping, and then maybe having some presentation, and then waiting till we actually have a full planning commission. We're missing our chair and John. Both of them have an incredible amount of experience and expertise, and I feel like their voices would be very important to be heard.
Okay, so given that, then let's hit the pause button on the RGA proposal and move into a staff report about our gateway area discussion and mapping exercise this evening.
Yeah, and just before we begin that, I guess, I've heard a couple of ideas put on the table about not making decisions tonight. And so I want to check in with the Planning Commission and see if that's where you're at. The intent for tonight's meeting is really about making some concrete decisions. And so if you feel like you need to have the full membership before you're ready to do that, that's really going to change the way we approach tonight's meeting. I don't think this exercise is worth doing twice. It's going to be, some significant investment and work and thinking and process. And we've assembled our team here tonight. We've got, the entire community development planning team, Joe Matier, our senior planner, Dee Lafreda, senior planner, Jennifer Dart, our community development deputy director. Nature Kotri from engineering is here. We've got Ben Noble, for our form-based code team. And we've assembled all these people here tonight to help you work through, decision trees so that you can come out on the other side with a recommendation to the city council. You do have a quorum. You have more than a quorum. You are able to make decisions tonight if you choose to, but if the majority of you feel like you're just not going to be able to do that, I think we'd like to know that now. I'm going to ask my staff to leave the table so we can cut to, we'll do something other than the mind mapping.
My position on that is that the public is here, we're all here. I would prefer that Julie and John were here, but I don't see a reason to not make decisions tonight in their absence. We do have more than a quorum, and my vote would be to carry on with this exercise.
So I didn't see that we were going to do that on the agenda. There wasn't anything specific, so I guess I'm a little bit confused. I don't want you to have to do this twice. I feel like with the time we have, it's very likely that we're gonna not have time to get to the very end anyway. I didn't realize that this, I guess what I'm just saying is that we can still do all of this without having you to do it twice, and we can still hear the presentation. We can still come and do some decision, but I still would like to have the other two commissioners weigh in, and it doesn't need to be like redone. I mean, they can watch it on YouTube and catch up, and then by our next meeting, we're all on the same page.
That would mean not making a decision tonight specifically.
I thought we had other decisions to make also. Is that the only decision that we had on the table tonight?
Tonight, what we're hoping to do is get through a whole list of issues in the Gateway project and all the concerns that commissioners and the public have. The staff is ready with a staff report. There's a lot of community members here. My position is we should carry on with this, even as a group -2. And if we have to leave off in this process and continue, then we hope they're back with us if we need to do so. But I think that this evening's exercise will not be a ton of discussion. It's going to be, do we feel comfortable with this, or do we feel like we need more information? And we can map out a clear pathway for getting decisions made on some of these items that we've talked about really over a lot of meetings. And I don't, my vote is definitely not to have to put that off this evening absent two commissioners.
I totally agree.
Judith?
Because all of these decisions are in fact interim discussions, I think we should go ahead, recognizing that until we have a formal recommendation to the council on the plan as a whole, it's all basically interim. And I would hope that the commissioners who are absent, if they have significant disagreements with anything that goes on here tonight, that they will bring those to the next meeting they attend or correspond with us through staff in the interim.
Great, thank you, Judith. Christian, are you in agreement that we want to move forward with this? You comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable with it. Let's do it.
Okay, let's move to the staff report. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that process clarification. Ready?
Okay, so I am going to start out before turning it over to David, just to try and set some objectives and framework for tonight. I think we all pretty much understand what we're going to be up to, but it is going to be a pretty dynamic meeting, and so I wanted to just provide a little bit of information before we get started. And David, can you go to the next slide, please? So one of our members of the public here tonight mentioned that the draft plan, the revised draft plan that's up on the website, is different than what is in your packet. This is specifically what is different. There is this nice little disclaimer that we added after the release of the draft when it went out with your packet last week. And so this, essentially paraphrasing what this says here, is that this is an updated interim plan. It is far from being the final version, but this mostly reflects the committee's recommendations to date, and also public input received through the end of September that comports with the draft plan. And the release of this interim was a commitment that we made to the Planning Commission at the City Council at our August 23rd special study session, which was really to show the work that we've been doing for several months now, focusing on different policy chapters with a variety of committees, and they've put a lot of work into this. And people were also calling for this work to be shared with the Planning Commission and the public in a comprehensive version. And even though, it definitely might seem like it's moving fast, this is a pretty exciting turning point in the preparation of this document, because it is the first time that modifications have been published since the draft was released in December of last year. So it's been about a year. And this is the first time that we have released an updated document, and there are definitely still some important policy questions to sort out with this body before it goes to the City Council. But this draft does reflect dozens and dozens of hours with committee volunteers who bring a wide array of expertise, and also many members of the public who are here with us tonight, who have been here with us for dozens and dozens of these meetings. And so recommendations for changes to the plan, as we've heard tonight, that are either in conflict with the draft or represent somewhat competing recommendations, are included in a table that will be published separately. And we're hoping by the next meeting, if not sooner, to get that out. And as you can probably expect, the two most significant areas that still need to be decided by the Planning Commission, where we are seeing a lot of diverse opinion, is building height, which we've been talking about at the Commission for the last few meetings, as well as the conversion of L Street. So these are hopefully going to continue to be a focus of the next few scheduled public hearings, and that's partially the intent of our mind mapping tonight, is to get some of these things sorted out and really focus in on what materials are needed for this commission to begin to formulate that formal recommendation to the City Council. And so our goal at this point is to really focus in on recommendations from the Planning Commission and make those additional modifications to the draft that the public wants to see to prepare for another round of City Council review. And we're really excited to work with you on getting that work done. And so tonight we're going to work pretty systematically, hopefully, to hold a series of targeted discussions on what the draft still needs in order to prepare us as staff for next modifications to the Gateway Area Plan, the preparation of our form-based code, and community engagement more broadly. And this is particularly important, as has been mentioned, because your guidance will allow us to go to the City Council and request any additional budget that we need to bring in whatever support we need to move this work forward. And I do have some dates of upcoming meetings that I wanted to share, but I wanted to just turn it to Jen and David. Do you have any other sort of disclaimer clarifications that you want to make? No? Okay. Okay, great. Next slide. Perfect. So before we had this hearing, we were considering, where do we want to go? What support can we bring to the commission before the end of the year? And this is absolutely not to say that we will not be working into 2023. We absolutely will. There are still a lot of things that need to be sorted out, both for the Gateway Plan and the form-based code, but also the general plan more broadly. But tonight is October 11th. We have one more meeting in October, 2 in November, 2 in December, and then that is the end of 2022, and we'll be on to 2023. And so I have some kind of animations, David, if you want to maybe just click through those. So as we continue to working with the Planning Commission on the Gateway Plan, we also want to begin to shift our conversations towards the form-based code, hold some of those additional workshops that we've been talking about with Ben Noble, who's here tonight, if you have questions for him. We also have discussed the potential to maybe integrate some of his work into Planning Commission hearings if the Planning Commission would like to be more on the ground for that work. Our hope is to have 2 of the 3 planned workshops before the end of the year, if that seems to be timely, and that's on packet page 10, where it outlines the 3 workshops and the content for those that we have so far. The third workshop is specific to community amenities, and it may make sense to have some targeted and facilitated planning commission discussions on the community benefits and community amenities, as well as any other areas, policy areas that the planning commission wants to focus on before the end of the year. And we'll really be looking to this body to guide what other policy modifications you want to make, and how you want to do that. But the intent is to work either with staff to facilitate, or ideally with our professional facilitation team to really dig into those community benefits as has been requested by the commission, and that's part of our next step. So that final workshop for form-based code could happen in early 2023, and if we need to continue to have facilitated sessions, depending on where we're at with form-based code and community amenities, obviously we can continue to do that. Next slide, please. So these targeted facilitated sessions, these again would mostly focus on community benefits and community amenities, assuming that that will take a fair amount of time for the Planning Commission to get through, and tie that into wherever we land with height and the number of benefit tiers associated with that height. And one other thing to note is that on your next agenda for the October 25th meeting, we're hoping to basically poll commissioners on whether or not the meetings that fall close to the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays maybe should be rescheduled. And so please, consider that as well and come prepared with maybe some dates that would work for you. We are hoping to reschedule and not cancel those meetings because there is a lot of work to do. So I guess a final note would be we are hoping to both work on community amenities and other elements, other chapters of the Gateway Plan sort of in tandem with working to do additional community engagement on the form-based code, and try and get into those details that the Commission has been asking for, and kind of do those things in tandem. But again, we're always open to other ideas and are here to support the Commission as we move forward. And I think that is everything that I wanted to say sort of at the beginning of this meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dila. Okay, so I'm going to transition into describing what we're going to attempt to do tonight. There's a lot of moving parts, so I guess before we get started, I do just want to ask that we all have a little patience, and we'll work through the issues together. Part of the reason we have the whole team here is because there are a lot of different elements that need to work simultaneously to pull this off, and so we're going to be, hoping to do that seamlessly, but recognizing that there may just be, some elements that we need to have some patience on. So thank you in advance for that. Okay, so the purpose of tonight's meeting is to work through an exercise where we'll be able to identify all of the concerns that we have around this, and that the Planning Commission will be able to select amongst those concerns. Could be all of them, it could be a few subset of them that you want to then continue to work through solutions for, or resolutions to. The process is going to have a public participation component to it that we'll explain, and we've reserved some time at the very end for some public comment, but the public will be able to participate all the way through, as you'll see. Again, the objectives, and we'll go through these in a little bit more detail in a minute, are to provide a set of recommendations to the City Council about what the Planning Commission feels it needs to accomplish this work. Okay, so first, I want to note that the concerns that the community has, the concerns the Planning Commission has, are going to be tied to the maximum building height. And so we're going to ask you to first start by establishing the max building height and/or target elevation. As you had described last time, that these two things are interconnected. You want to make sure that you discuss both. That will help you establish what the set of concerns are, and in turn, the resolutions to those concerns. We are going to, through this process, start to identify the community amenities, but those are going to need to be tied to the maximum building heights again. These projects, in order to be feasible, will have to have community benefit programs that are commensurate with the revenues that those buildings will generate. Otherwise, we won't have any buildings generated. We're also going to start to identify, components of the form-based code standards that would make these maximum building heights possible. And finally, we'll identify information that you'll need to finalize these decisions. And so we see these as kind of the various subsets or the buckets of information that you'll be digesting tonight that will lead you into follow-up discussions. There's no way that you're going to get into very detailed discussions around amenities and benefits, the form-based code standards that you'd like to see, or additional information, whether that be through, additional studies, hearing experts come and talk to you, or, having subcommittees of the Planning Commission to get into that information in more detail. So those we'll start to thumbnail sketch what we're looking for, but we're not going to get into any depth tonight about those. And so here's a list of things that have been discussed before. Statistical surveys, subcommittees, new studies, all of those things can come out of tonight's discussion. We'll be tracking those. So just to kind of give a visual overview of the process and also to give the commission an opportunity to ask questions about this process, which is detailed in the staff report. We've also, had several conversations leading up to this with some of you as well. So the process, we're going to start by setting the building height maximum by district. You had your conversations in the last meeting on September 27th about these. There were a couple of ideas that were floated. So we're going to ask that you start by setting that building height threshold to work through the specific concerns that are tied to those. Commissioner Mayer.
Yeah, at one of our previous meetings, there was some discussion about modifying those district boundaries. I know Commissioner Chair Visade Alcock made some suggestions. I made a strong suggestion that no district straddle the coastal zone boundary. And the material that you provided us in our packet today with regard to the rationale for the approach to the plan that you gave really confirmed that not straddling that coastal zone boundary for any policy that would result in the need to consider them separately within the coastal zone is a good idea. So I'm wondering how we're going to take the local coastal program and the coastal zone boundary into account in this exercise.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a concern to me, so we'll put it on the list, and then the commission can work through, how to address that. So the first piece, once you've set that building height, is to identify the concerns related to those. The Planning Commission is going to be ultimately making the decisions about what concerns that you go on to further address, and the public is going to have direct access to this process through Slido. Now, I know you've heard some people that are concerned about the validity of Slido polling in terms of its ability to, convey statistically valid conclusions. I just want to be real clear before we get into the further process that is not the purpose of Slido tonight. The purpose of Slido, the way that we're using it tonight, is to make sure that we have a complete list. And so it doesn't matter how many times a particular item gets upvoted, if you will. We're not going to look at that upvoting of that particular item and say, see, most people are concerned about this. That's not the purpose of tonight's meeting. The purpose of tonight's meeting is airing all of the issues. And so Slido is a really good tool for us to be able to give the public real-time access to your decision-making. We're going to have Slido up, we're going to have the list up, and we'll be taking that information on simultaneously. Regardless of what the concern is, it could be a concern that's completely unrelated, that the Planning Commission ultimately feels like is completely disconnected from this decision-making process, and you may not wish to consider that concern further in your deliberations. It's going to show up on the list so that you can make that decision here in real time. We're then going to look to identify solutions or resolutions to those concerns. We're going to have a list of items that we, already have studies for, or we're already planning to have studies for. Good example of this is the form-based code, where the form-based code, we have a scope of work, but we've heard from the community and from some commissioners that we'd like to see that scope of work expanded. We actually included both the scope of work and a proposal for an expanded scope of work in your packet tonight. So that's an area where you've identified a concern, public has identified a concern, you've said we want more engagement with the form-based code. We'd like to have a better form-based code than what's currently scoped. If that's ultimately your conclusion, you can make a recommendation through the solution set. And again, the public will be able to help us populate those solution sets. The Planning Commission is going to make ultimately the decisions which solution sets that you choose to pursue. An example I've been using to illustrate this is, if someone comes forward and says, hey, we'd like you to work with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to develop your sea level rise policy. Well, I think we would all acknowledge that that's a really robust way of approaching this. It's also outside of our scope and ability to do so. That is going to show up on the list. It's a really good idea. The Planning Commission is going to be in the driver's seat in terms of saying, we want to include this in our final solution set. Ultimately, the Planning Commission will then go through the process of evaluating those solutions. There's a lot to get through tonight. We recognize that, want to be conscious of that. If we don't get through it all, that is fine. We can continue the exercise. But our objective would be to get through all of the concerns, all of the solution sets, and to have at least started evaluating those solutions, saying these are the kinds of issues that we'd like to see come back to us. Now, we've included, I said at the beginning, we've included, I believe, all of the concerns raised by Arcata, Responsible Growth Arcata, for example. And so the Planning Commission could evaluate, do we feel like we need to see a study on that, or do we feel like we need to have a working group on that? And you can put that into the solution set tonight. If we haven't fully captured that, folks will be able to participate via Slido. So again, we're going to have the Slido available for folks. I'm going to show that in a moment. If you have your devices, or if you're zooming in from home, if you're watching on YouTube, you can join the Slido process and participate. If you do not have a device tonight, we also have some papers and pens, I believe, on that back corner. And if you want to write your concerns down on those Post-it notes and then bring them up to staff, we'll add them to the list as well. Okay, so the outcomes, again, just to reiterate, a list of concerns, a list of resolutions, and then ultimately the Planning Commission recommendation. We anticipate these will fall into these kind of categories of either it's an existing study or one that we're proposing within the existing scope. It's a new study that we need to evaluate whether we have the ability to commission. There's some expert opinion you'd like to hear from. One of the things that I've heard frequently is we'd like to hear from the Arcata Fire Department. I've spoken with the chief and he's willing to come and speak with you. So there's an example of, expert opinion that you can hear from. The committee working group or new work product, for example, the additional form-based code. Those are the outcomes we're anticipating. The process is, here's a snapshot or a screenshot of the spreadsheet that we'll be using to track the list of concerns and solution sets. Not expecting you to be able to read this, but I just want to give you a hint as to what we'll be using, and we'll be organizing your thoughts into this spreadsheet so that we have a record of those decisions. Okay, and so just wants to reinforce this idea. What we're going to get out of this is a starting point for these benefits, codes, and resources. You're not going to have substantive discussions. Those will be follow-ups to this meeting. A description of that we can use to start the EIR process and to do additional code engagement. And then finality on the commission, items the commission does not need to explore in more detail. So if there's a list of items you've heard, I've heard enough about this. I feel like we have plenty in the record. We as a commission now feel like we can move on from this, and we're going to take that information as it comes. Then we can note that as well. And then the flip side of that as well, also obviously issues that you do want to consider further. Again, this is just the inverse, what we're not going to get. We are not going to get a comprehensive list of community benefits. We're going to need additional time and more meetings to come back and evaluate those. I know that the commission, the public are very interested in having those conversations, and so we can only have so much discussion at one time. Comprehensive list of form-based code standards we're not getting, and a list of additional resources. You can continue to add these on. Okay, so finally, here's the QR code if you're at home, or if you can, pick that from your phone. This is how you can QR code into the Slido, or if you go to slido.com, and when asked at that location to enter the meeting ID, it's PC 1011, Planning Commission, October 11th. So we'll give a moment for folks to open up that Slido. Okay, now I'm going to transition away from the PowerPoint. Are there questions about the process?
Yeah, are we expected to do Slido on our phones up here, or?
You do not. The Planning Commission is going to basically vote by hand. There's no PC Slido link. Okay, so organize this information here. Okay. We're pulling up the Slido. So again, public does have the ability to upvote these if you wish. We're going to go through this list once just so you can see what's on here. And these are also, if you're on Slido, you can scroll through them yourself. We've added everything that's on the list in the Excel spreadsheet to the Slido. And so you can add new concerns via Slido if you feel like we haven't covered something, or you can, if you wish to, upvote. But again, your upvote doesn't mean that, it's telling us that you think that too, but we're not using that information to indicate popularity or importance at this point. Okay, so with that,
After we get this initial list, are we going to be ready then as a commission to discuss what building height proposal we're going to use as a starting point for this mapping and analysis?
yes, actually, thank you for that, Vice Chair. That's probably the first thing to do so that you can know whether or not these map onto those
Right.
your concerns. So thank you for
Okay.
that.
So given that, just to reiterate that we're not going to try and solve all these issues this evening, but that in order to go through a process where we identify concerns and solutions, we have to pick a starting point in the form of a recommended building height. So given that, at the last time we discussed this, there is, for example, the plan as it is in the draft, which is the, draft that was released by the city, 8 stories, etc. I made a proposal that dropped that down and was a 7, 6, 5, 4 tiered proposal. Judith made I think which was a 6, 6 question mark 4 proposal. And then John made a cap at 4 stories across the board proposal. So given the fact that we need to pick a spot to begin the exercise this evening, does anyone have a motion or a recommendation, want to pick one of the proposals that's already been on the table as a starting point for this evening's exercise?
Well, I'll jump in and support the 7654 proposal.
Okay, now is this going to be a first and then a second in the form of a motion, or we just do a vote?
You could formalize it like that if you wanted to, or you could do the straw poll, either one. It has the same effect. To Commissioner Mayer's point, these are sort of interim decisions.
Of course.
This will allow us to go through this process with an idea in mind of how significant the issues are relative to, the building heights that you're considering.
So you're making a motion. Does anyone have a second to that motion?
Could I recommend that we not use a motion second process for this relatively informal exercise here? I think it's quite confusing to the public. These are not formal motions that our body is taking that will result in recorded actions specifically. So I suggest that we don't use that format if possible.
So perhaps just a back and forth until we try to get to something we agree on, right? Or even if we have to go in between something, but we do need something.
We need
here,
something, and-
so that we can move forward onto the next part of the exercise.
So perhaps a majority vote then
Sure.
of present commissioners?
That works too.
So I will certainly vote for the proposal that I made, that Dan has voted for. Christian, can you weigh in on this?
I will follow the votes of you two. I will propose, I'll follow the 7-6-5-4. Yep.
So that's Judith?
No.
Kim?
No.
So that's still a majority? Staff have a recommendation about how to move forward, given that?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I think that, certainly, again, had this been a formal vote, that would obviously be an action that passed. You may struggle to find a proposal that everyone is willing to move forward with. The motion process would allow for a counter motion. So if you want to try and, build more consensus, you can give it another crack. Again, I guess the way that I would look at this is that, this is not just an exercise, for the fun of it. You're actually doing work that's leading to a recommendation to the city council. And so, the efforts that you put in related to the building heights that are, connected to these concerns should, by the end of this process, result in a majority of you wishing to move forward with that proposal, recognizing these concerns, identifying solutions, and coming up with a recommendation to the council for how to move forward.
I mean, I think it's a certainty that we're not going to get a unanimous, given the discussions we've had in the past, unless something dramatic changes in the expressed view of the commissioners here and not here. So it seems to me like we have to fall some way on a majority.
Yeah, how about, Scott, if we just hear briefly, like, what's the dissenting opinion here, and maybe it starts to nudge the ball back and forth a little bit, just so we can flesh this out.
That sounds good. Kim, do you want to talk about what your issues are with the 7654 and what perhaps an alternative view you'd like to propose is?
I don't want to be the dissenter all the time, so I'm just going to step back and let you guys hash it out, and I will go along with whoever the majority is, or some kind of consensus.
Judith, did you want to expand on your view on the proposals, or where you're at with that?
Yeah, I don't see a whole lot of difference between a maximum number of stories at 7 versus 8. Either one of those I think is too high, especially if we're looking at that combined with potentially very large, bulky buildings. And of course, we haven't addressed the design issues yet in this discussion. I don't know that they can really be considered separately. So when you consider that a very tall building could also be very broad, and we don't know what the recommendations are yet at this point, you come up with buildings that are just too big for both the soils in the area where they're being proposed at likely reasonable cost, and for the character of the community, as well as for the views that those very high, potentially very bulky buildings would block.
Got it. I understand those concerns. Does it change the fact, though, that specifically this evening, we're going to look at the concerns you listed and name the process by which we could resolve those, or get a process by which we could resolve those? Does that make you feel any more comfortable with at least choosing a starting point so that we can go through the exercise?
No, it doesn't. I've already gone through that exercise in my own mind, and I'm satisfied that by avoiding 7 and 8 story buildings, that would be a great starting point to discuss those other issues.
Okay, well, given the fact that Kim is going to vote for the majority, I count that as 4-1 this evening, and I'm going to propose that we use that 7, 6, 5, 4 building height as at least starting point for our discussion.
So I guess I was a little bit confused. I guess I would like to, go ahead.
Just remember that all this is an interim discussion, and it just nudges the conversation, and listing concerns, as Judith just outlined, is exactly what the next step is. So if it's view, if it's earthquake, if sea level rise, those will all get put onto this list and registered. It doesn't mean you have to support 7 stories or any of this, but we're
Okay.
just trying to flesh out, get to the next steps, you know.
We can't talk about the things that we're all concerned about unless we pick a point at which to begin the conversation, which is what we're trying to do right now.
And so I guess I'm still back at, with regards to, we haven't redistricted, we don't know, I mean, it's so broad, but I guess if it's a starting point, we can start.
Right. I mean, our conversations have been kind of circular and not really progressing. And I think this exercise will help bring up the concerns. That's what it's specifically built to do, and then give us specific ways that we can address those concerns. And I'm hopeful that that exercise will, be helpful for us as well as community.
And keeping in mind that if we don't all at some point feel comfortable with this, with how they've been addressed, like, oh my gosh, we hire a specialist, we, set up a working group or whatever, and we conclude that liquefaction is going to toast these things or whatever, then we come back, because this is just interim.
But if
We
we
come
don't
back.
start somewhere, we won't get to the point of having the working group, a further discussion, expert analysis. Does everyone feel comfortable with that? Christian, are you on board with us?
Yeah, we need something to analyze, guys. We need to put something on paper. And until we put something on paper, the whole point of the analysis is to have that starting point. And, we can't make assumptions based on information that we don't have, nor having the technical expertise present or participating. We just need to put something down, because if we don't put something down, this is just circular and just a waste of time.
Judith?
Yeah, and I'm realizing that so far I appear to be in a minority here, and as a process of what the commission is willing to address as a starting point, I think it would be important to actually go on record that no one on the commission wishes to start the analysis with 8-story buildings. Is that something that we can do first?
I mean, I think by agreeing that we want to start at 7, it basically says we don't want to start at 8.
Let's just say that then.
Okay, well, my proposal is that we don't start at 8, but that we start at 7 and drop incrementally down from 6 to 5 to 4.
I'm in agreement.
I'm in agreement.
Kim?
Yes.
Better?
Sure.
Okay, I'm gonna start to walk through what we've seen. So on the right-hand side, we have the Slido, the live Slido as it's going, excuse me. We'll do our best to track these as they come up. The issues pop around a little bit, but what we've done is anywhere where you see the yellow W, that's what we believe we've heard from the public, and so we try to populate those, and you'll see that, you know, some people are upvoting those. And then anywhere there's either, you know, anonymous or somebody else has added one, they've clicked this add button. So if you're out there in the world and you want to add something, you can click add, and then you can put your item on there. And again, our intent is to populate this side with everything that we've, you know, already populated, and then everything that we're seeing pop up in addition to. And so the first objective will be for the Planning Commission to go through this list and to walk through, you know, items that you want to continue to talk about. What I've done here is I've hid the solution sets. For some reason, some of them aren't hiding, but I'm going to hide the solution sets so we can focus on the concerns to start. And so you'll see a couple of solutions in here like these here. I don't know why they're not disappearing, but they aren't. And so, you know, our first objective is to go through these and say, you know, as a commission, just quick vote of hands, you know, yes, I want to talk more about this. That's the only decision you need to make at this point. So for example, liquefaction and geotech has been a big concern, especially in the Beryl district. And so, you know, if you want to talk more about that, quick show of hands, and we'll note it and we'll come back to it.
Let's have a show of hands. Who would like to have more discussion about liquefaction and geotech? Christian?
Absolutely.
Unanimous?
Okay. And I want to make this just a little bit.
Ready to move on?
Yeah, hang tight here. Sorry, I'm trying to adjust this so that folks can see what we're actually doing.
I think just leave that one at this point.
Say again.
Just leave this one up at this point. I think it's fine.
I want the public to be able to see what.
A process question about what you're asking. On the chart that we had in our packet, for each of these headings, there are a number of items that are on there. Are we going to go through this process for the items under those headings as well? Or are we just addressing the headings?
What packet page are you on, June?
The matrix that we got under liquefaction and geotech, there were 2 items, and EIR will include analysis of soils and project level foundation studies.
Was that what was emailed today, or is this in the packet?
No, this, was it, what was he, it was yesterday? Was it yesterday?
Can you hit it next?
So are we
It sounds like you were,
addressing that
talking about-
chart? Or are we just addressing what we're looking at? on
Just
the
addressing
screen?
what we're looking at here. So, in other words, the first item was liquefaction and geotech. We all agree we'll want to talk more about that. And so now moving on to sea level rise, how does commissioners feel? You feel either comfortable with the studies that we've received today, or you'd like to have more discussion about sea level rise? Yes to more discussion on sea level rise. Dan, Kim?
Yes.
Judith, yes. Christian?
Yes.
We would all like to hear more discussion on sea level rise. And process-wise, I just want to say we may want to discuss everything on this list at more detail, and that's fine. So we're not trying to get to a specific outcome. Just important that everyone says what their concerns are. Affecting the character of small town. Do we feel like we're comfortable with the plan and how it affects or doesn't affect the character of our town? Or how do people feel regarding the need to discuss character in more detail?
I would like to further explore that. I feel like the community has a lot of concerns and objections, and we need more engagement.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think it's a great topic. I think there might want to be a slash, you know, state law mandates and some of the realities of changes coming.
Ways, that can go under ways that we would address or feel better about that.
Yeah, thanks.
Judith, would you like to have more discussion around character?
Sure.
Christian?
Yeah, more discussion, please.
Okay, and maybe one way to speed this part of the conversation up a little bit is, you know, everything that's on here is likely to be a yes. So if there's any that are no's for any commissioner, maybe you can raise that as an objection. And otherwise, we'll put X's on all of these. Or,
I'd like to at least just kind of go through them one by one.
okay, okay.
And I'm fine to say, let's assume we want more discussion, but let's take them one by one.
Okay.
Does anyone not want to discuss wastewater treatment?
I'd like to change the item on that list because we're addressing, or will need to address not just treatment capacity, but vulnerability, in particular to sea level rise at that location. And that doesn't really appear to be on the list here.
Or it's something that we could detail under sea level rise specifically.
You okay with adding a new line item, or you want to put it under one of the others?
I'd kind of like to have it under the wastewater treatment
The way it appears there,
concerns.
is that okay? Vulnerability under wastewater treatment capacity? If we add vulnerability as well as capacity?
Yes, that would do it.
Okay, if staff could add vulnerability under wastewater treatment, so that in addition to capacity, we're looking at vulnerability, specifically perhaps as regards SLR.
Okay.
There's a colon in vulnerability there, semicolon.
We'll clean things up later. This
Okay.
keyboard is not my normal keyboard. You're going to see a lot of typos. Let's
Got
get
it.
through the material.
Okay, active recreation, open spaces. Does anyone not want to have more conversation? Active recreation, open spaces. Okay, let's make that an X. Christian, I'm assuming you're going to jump in if you're sticking with us here. Shading impacts on nearby buildings. Does anyone not want to discuss that? Parking. Ownership opportunities. Accessibility.
I was just curious if you could clarify accessibility?
Yeah, what we're referring to here is ADA
Okay.
and yeah.
Can I just ask, isn't that code? Like, wouldn't accessibility just be mandated into every one of these structures?
But we don't have to do the minimum.
It would be, absolutely, and there are folks who have raised the question, can we ask for more? Can we go above and beyond? And one of the ideas was to incorporate that into a, community amenity.
Okay.
Got it. Moving on, gentrification, housing affordability. Does anyone not want to discuss more about that? Okay. Lack of multimodal infrastructure. We'd all like to discuss more of that. Can you scroll the list up? Okay. Impacts on the Creamery district, Creamery building. Is there anyone that doesn't want to discuss impacts on the Creamery district or building?
Would that roughly fall under the historic resources topic? Is that really what the
It
reference
could be
is?
historic resources, or it might also be reflected in details in the form-based code, where we might want to make requirements that buildings that surround the Creamery reflect the architectural history of the Creamery.
Okay, yeah, I'm fine with that.
Fire and police service and adequate staffing and or equipment. Just going to assume we're all going to need a little more information there. Can you scroll that list up, please? Population projections.
I'm not sure why that's on there. I don't know. I mean, the assumption is that we're in an increasing population with increasing development opportunity. I don't know.
I think with this one, I'm probably comfortable with staff projections on population and don't really need to spend more time on that.
I concur. I think David did a good job discussing that earlier.
Dan, were you saying you're comfortable with current population projections?
Well, yeah, I would not put an X on that one. I feel
Got
like
it.
we've talked about that. And
Kim?
I'm okay then.
Judith?
I think those are a set of assumptions that are the basis of the plan, and these types of things are policy driven statement, so I'm not sure it is appropriate here, so I'd cut that off for this one as well.
Okay, we don't need further discussion on population projections, effect on businesses. And I'm assuming that means either monetary or traffic or other implications or effects on existing businesses by expanded population in the gateway.
Yeah, I think that's more along the lines of what we've heard, and concerns about potentially having to relocate businesses that are existing.
Got it. Wait till we get our list back up. Effects on businesses. I guess I'm not 100% sure how that's going to be. Fiscal impacts is something else we would be discussing. Presumably, fiscal impacts would include impacts on business, things like sea level rise, liquefaction.
I could see it being something, I mean, if there was a nice presentation on it, you know, are there other places for some of the types of businesses that will potentially get unhoused? To where would they move to? You know, are there parts of Arcata that have that kind of development, warehouse, whatever it is? I don't know. It feels like a topic that we might want to hear something on, if it's out there.
Does anyone not want to hear more discussion on the effect on businesses from the Gateway Area Plan? Okay, we'll put that on the list and move on to loss of L Street. I would definitely like to hear more about, have an expanded discussion on the L Street situation.
Is there a way to phrase that differently?
Than the L Street situation?
Maybe future of L Street and transportation or circulation proposals in the draft or something.
I think the concern that was raised is that the current plan will result in a loss of the linear park on L Street. So we can rephrase that however you want.
How about L Street future?
So it'd be loss of L Street as it is, or linear park, or what?
Mm-hmm. Framing it that way assumes that the default is the loss of L Street.
That's why I referred to it as the L Street situation, because in my mind, that sort of encompassed all the potential changes that could or may not happen to L Street.
We could just say L Street and leave it at that. How
Yeah, or
about
maybe
that?
changes to L Street.
Fine. L Street. I think we all want to discuss L Street situation or otherwise. Fiscal impacts. Yeah, we need to hear more about fiscal impacts. And from my perspective, does anyone not want to hear more about
Yeah,
fiscal
I mean, that
impacts?
fits into fire, it fits into the, all the infrastructure.
Affordability, all the other things, yeah.
Okay, and there, pretty explicitly, we have seen references to a finance district, but no actual proposal material whatsoever. And so, in terms of, finance options rather than fiscal impacts, I think that would be the level of policy that we're interested in knowing more about.
Yeah, as we move on, we'll talk about what kind of information would help us address these issues. Tsunami possibility, storm surge. Does anyone not want to hear more of a discussion about the possible impacts from the tsunami or storm surge? Okay, let's put that on the list. Lack of diversity in design. I'm assuming that means lack of architectural diversity.
Yeah, some people have been concerned that that by adopting this plan, that it will result in a lack of diversity in design.
Okay, let's put that on the list. equity ownership opportunities.
That's been touched on already a couple of times up above, hasn't it?
Yeah, I feel that is they're the same there.
So maybe a subset of ownership opportunities.
I think it's still addressed above.
Scroll up, David, and we can see possibly where that might fit.
Under gentrification, housing affordability possibly?
Yeah,
That's where I would think it,
exactly.
or ownership opportunities.
Yeah, ownership opportunities. So let's combine those two together. I don't think that needs to be a separate piece.
Okay, now we're getting into some of the issues that were identified in the Slido poll tonight. So again, we're putting down everything that comes up.
As of cell number 70, we're now into, is that where we are now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, city staff not telling the whole story. Presumably that means about gateway area plan and what is or is not happening.
I think that comes under like maybe community engagement or right below public comment, voices.
Community engagement hasn't been on here yet, has it?
It's public comment.
Okay. Oh, there you go,
I
right
think
there. Next
Kim's
one.
looking ahead to the next item. If I'm honest, I'm not 100% sure what city staff not telling the whole story means exactly, whether that means not effectively sharing information about the gateway area plan or whether that's speaking to something further afield. I'm not exactly sure.
I think I wrote this verbatim without any additional context out of here. What I take it to mean is that there's a feeling of lack of trust and transparency in the process.
I don't need anything on that one.
I don't need
personally.
anything on that either, because I think any of the concerns that might be embedded in that are going to be more than daylighted in the discussions we've already talked about and put on the list for further discussion. Kim? Oh, Judith, go ahead.
I think we need to talk about the public process of the plan itself. It certainly seems to be very much on the minds of the members of the public who have spoken in our meetings. Even this proposal that we've agreed to discuss about a potential advisory group is talking about public process. And so I think that that should be very much part of what we need more information about and what should be on our agenda to discuss.
Thank you. Christian?
Yeah, I think we need to better define our public process in regards of how we're discussing this whole entire plan. I feel, yeah, as we move forward, we need to be transparent and describe specifics of what we're going to converse upon. I understand this is an interim process and it's informal, but this is supposed to be a formal group, and we just need to tighten. We need to tighten things up.
Let's put that on the list. Can we
Wait,
get...
public process, you mean?
No, we'll go back. I think we were on cell 70 is where we were. City staff not telling the whole story, and I think that's merging into issues of trust around the process.
So it could say addressing issues of trust / public process, something like that?
I think staff just wrote verbatim something that came through Slido from the public.
Okay, then if it's verbatim right there, I don't need to hear anything more on that. If it's public process, I agree. I would enjoy a fleshed out conversation with the group about public process.
Then let's go ahead and change that to public process discussion and assume that encapsulates any concerns about, quote, city staff not telling the whole story. Is everyone comfortable with that?
I think David put in there transparency. We probably want to keep that in there. I think that's been one of the emerging concerns.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch
You
that.
put transparency in there and then you took it out?
I took it out because it was actually out of a different comment that I was trying to combine the two. Since you said no to that one, I removed transparency and I'll put it on another line item.
Let's go back up to where we left off. Cell 70, I think, is where we were.
Oh, there it is, transparency.
So, did we vote no on cell 70? Because I feel like in order to have community buy-in, we need to address it.
All I said was, the way it reads right now, I don't need any more information on that specific. If it's about public process and transparency, or something a little bit more broad that I can, feel the need to engage in, then
Yeah.
I'm all
Yeah,
for it.
yeah, I think if can we create a cell that says public process, because there may be other issues like city not telling the whole story that we can tuck into or address with the discussion about public process. Are you comfortable with that, Judith? Yes. Did you get that, David?
Yep, is this good, public process, transparency?
Perfect. So let's go back up to cell 73. I think considered below, that's going to be a part of public process. Construction impacts.
This is not verbatim, but it mentioned construction impacts related to, the construction traffic and then ongoing noise associated with construction.
Is there a discussion topic that we've already identified that would incorporate construction impacts into it?
I don't think there's a standalone topic there. It would be addressed in the EIR, and there are going to be temporary construction impacts with projects.
Does
Will this be-
does
Isn't
exist? Go ahead, Christian.
This will be evaluated in our air, noise, and greenhouse gas component of our EIR. I'd assume for the project and also for the construction of the the build out of the gateway area, I suppose.
One thing that the EIR is not likely to address would be the wide range of ongoing disruption that would be involved in changes in things like street patterns and non-environmental processes that could go on for 20 years, including discontinuities in bike paths and possible reroutings of streets. They're not necessarily environmental impacts, but they will definitely affect people's lives in the area. And so I think that talking about possible construction impacts beyond those that an EIR would consider is going to be important, and it might have something to do with the phasing of projects and a whole wide range of things that are important to daily life in Arcata. So I'd like to keep that in there.
Can staff speak to whether or not our existing code or the proposed form-based code would address any of these concerns around construction impacts already?
I mean, there would be, as there are in our current code, conditions around construction. I don't want anybody to think that we're saying that we're going to completely mitigate construction noise and construction traffic. If we have significant development, the construction, is going to be a component of that.
I mean, I think we all accept that there's going to be noise and disruption in association with this kind of construction.
I agree, and I personally don't need any more information on that.
One of the reasons I think that it should be something that we look at more is it is possible to have policies that say, if you're going to change a traffic pattern on a street, you have to do it, all at once, or you do it in increments, and to make decisions about those things and to do those things publicly and not assume that and traffic engineer is going to have the best answer. So it's those types of things I'm thinking about, effects that last for 20 years, not during the construction phase of a single project. And those are things that the city can explore and provide policy guidance on in a plan.
Got it. Christian, are you comfortable with concerns about construction impacts, or is this something you feel like you need to have more discussion about?
I feel there's conditions that we can place upon each project, and also I feel there'll be deliberation in respects to the EIR regarding, for instance, like the Migratory Bird Treaty, Act, in regards of when we can do specific pile driving operations, if that's going to occur, in respects to, taller structures, potentially hydroacoustic components as well as we get closer to water courses and so forth. There's a bunch of limiting factors in construction that, for instance, the permitting agencies, they're going to have an opportunity in respects to site-specific components, and also the overall formal comment process in our EIR.
So it sounds like I'm not 100% sure where you land on that. It sounds like you're seeing that a lot of these are going to be addressed in the EIR. Are you saying that you do or do not want to hear more discussions around construction impacts?
Well, we're talking about multiple things here. Judith just mentioned transportation components in respects to traffic flow. There's noise, there's air, there's a bunch of components associated with, construction disturbances in regards of, adjoining communities or within the Gateway area. Yeah, I don't know, and this is all hypothetical. We never know that this may be all constructed, it may not all be constructed. So I feel, we can assume that this whole area is going to be built out, and then we can address it that way, and try to figure out how we're going to get a consultant or our city engineer to describe it, in one way, how this is going to all come undone or come together.
It sounds like you would like to hear, you're a yes for more discussion on construction impacts.
Sure, let's do it.
Kim?
That's an absolute yes. What I'm hearing from the public is those that actually live there, they are concerned that this is going to be a 20-year process. And I think that in order to ease the concerns of the people who live there, we should have that conversation.
Let's add that to the list, David. January open house not compiled.
I abbreviated this a bit. There was a comment that we haven't released compiled data from our January open house that we have with the community.
I don't need to hear anything more about this myself.
My understanding is that it was compiled on Fred Weiss's site, so we do have that information now. Is there more to be done?
The city has put the information together in the engagement report that is kind of a living document. It's compiling information as we go through successive stages of engagement. I think some people have put forward that we didn't compile the information and report on it the way that they would have liked to have had it been reported on. And I understand and respect that. One of the things that we're balancing is the, where we focus our limited resources. And, I think we've heard many people in the public acknowledge that these types of events, the kinds of surveys we're doing, they're not statistically supported. They're really just a snapshot of the people who are there. And so investing a lot of energy into, trying to make something of that event when its primary function was to, get people interested in to know what's going on with the Gateway Area Plan, to view it as a snapshot of the information from the people who attended that event. I think we've done that effectively, and it's on our website currently under the community engagement report.
So I guess my question is, before we move on, because I can't see what's below it, I think the reason that people want to have that information compiled is that I feel like the gap is that there's no official survey or questionnaire that's gone through all the residents. Is that later that we're going to have that addressed, or?
I think that's a different matter. It's this, I don't think this is talking about the survey, and if I read into this and look at what I think the concerns are around this question, it sounds to me like concerns not being heard or not being presented to the public. And I think what we're doing right now is looking at every possible concern that we or the public here or on Zoom has. So for me, I think not only I think we're addressing this issue by the process that we're in right now, and I don't feel like I need to tag this for further discussion. Tim, you agree?
Totally.
Christian?
I concur.
Okay, so let's not put that one on. Judith?
I think it helps for the city to point out where that information is recorded, and also to thank Fred for putting that stuff on the website as well. I'm actually encouraged to see that members of the public have captured a level of detail before overworked city staff has been able to do that. It's all very helpful coming together.
Thanks, Judith. It's 4-1, so let's not put that on the list. Transportation Safety Committee ignored. Does staff have a sense of specifically what that
Yeah.
means?
That's in regard to L Street, and that is on the, I think we talked about it at the very beginning, and that's kind of why we put out the information on the new draft, so you'll be seeing
The
that.
discussion we've already pegged about L Street is going to cover that, so let's not
Absolutely.
add that. Can we move on to the scroll up so we can see what the next item to discuss is, please? Buildings not built soon enough.
Yeah, and again, I think this was verbatim. The way I take this is that their concern is that the housing we need, the buildings, the jobs aren't going to be built soon enough.
I certainly share the sense of urgency around that and feel like the process that we're in is getting us there as quickly as we can all go, having thoughtful discussions. Does anyone need to have more discussion on this item?
The less discussion we have on some of these items will be the sooner that buildings get built.
Agreed. Christian, are you in agreement there?
Agreement.
Judith? Okay, let's not put that on the list. Who is making money on the buildings plan? Well, I would suggest, I suppose it's you could interpret that in a variety of different ways. I would presume that the builders of the buildings are going to make money on it, but presumably people who purchase units in there may also make money on this.
So could I add to that? What I've heard from several people in the communities, they were wanting to see an overlay on the various districts by how many owners own it. Say, for example, I don't know, the Beryl District, is there a multitude of owners, or is there a particular district where there might be only one or two owners? So I think that people just want to feel like there's transparency and that everything's on the up and up, and I think that's a conversation worth having. I mean, hopefully we can get through it quickly and appease people's fears, but if we don't address it, then people are going to think we're hiding.
I understand the question, but I'm sure there's no way we could have that information right now. That requires a level of specificity that the city and none of us have, because
Actually, any real estate agent
That's
can
just-
get the APA.
We can identify this through tax records. The city can identify this through the county assessor's office.
Or the public that's interested
Or the
in that
public who-
topic.
yeah.
We don't need to address it as a part of the
I guess
planning commission.
Yeah.
I'm confused then about what the question
This is like a
asking.
conspiracy.
it seems to me, the question strikes me as a suspect question of, is there something nefarious going on with the Gateway plan, and who is making money on the plan? Is that, do other people interpret that in a different way? I would say at this point, no one is making money on the Gateway plan. We're here volunteering, and the city's spending money to put the plan together. At some point in the future, a variety of people will make money on the buildings, including potential restaurants or businesses that would go in there. I'm just not sure how we would answer that question.
So again, if you go to who owns the land, that can be identified through any realtor, or as Chris said, public records. I think that if we just put that on the table, there's gonna look like there's transparency, that nobody's
but-
trying to hide anything.
But how does identifying who owns a piece of property now tell you who's going to make money off of that property in the future? I don't see the connection.
I say no on that one personally. If we're.
Yeah, I say no. I
starting
don't
to
think it's a
register
useful
in.
discussion. I think it just is just going to burn time and not really give us any useful information. Judith?
Information about ownership of the property is public record. It's easy to find. Who will make money on the buildings on the plan? That may be something that we want to have some policy discussions about, but I wouldn't phrase it in those terms. And so far, the only one making money on the plan are the consultants that the city's hiring. And I do appreciate that in our packet for this week, we actually have some additional information about who they are and how much money is involved. That's actually very helpful in figuring out the scope of what the city and staff and the Planning Commission can do. But I don't think that it needs to be here in this form worded in that way.
Are you in agreement, Christian?
I'm in agreement.
Okay, let's not put that one on the list. I think the next question is pretty much the same in my mind. Who will own the buildings? There's no way for us to possibly answer the question about who's going to own a building that hasn't even been designed or built yet. I don't see that as a useful exercise. Does
And I do
anyone-
think ownership is included elsewhere above as well.
Let's not put on the list. That's very close to the question we just discussed. Why so high? I would say no to that, because we are looking at all the pieces of the building heights as a part of this exercise. So I think that's an important question, but peeling it out as a separate item is redundant to discussions we've already said we want to have. Affordable rents, number 97. I think that's an important question, but I think it's addressed above. Thank you. We're definitely going to include that in at least a couple of the discussions we've already targeted. Cal Poly Humboldt. Oops. That's okay. Cal Poly Humboldt needs to pull their weight. For example, for fire. I'm going to assume, first of all, that we've already said we want to have discussions about fire and talk with someone from the fire department. I think we discussed fire at the very beginning, and I'm going to also just make an assumption that Cal Poly is not going to build a building that they can't have fire and emergency services prepared for.
I'm wondering if there's a question later then that talks about Cal Poly Humboldt needing to come to the table and be part of the process.
We don't have that on the list yet, but I can add it.
I think
Thank
that it would be useful to talk about policies with regard to roles of Cal Poly and collaboration with the city, recognizing that the university cannot be compelled to comply with the policies and regulatory framework that this plan will come up with. So the question then becomes policies that we can include that will encourage them to do what the city would like them to do.
Okay, so I think what's unhelpful about cell 100 is e.g. fire, but perhaps a discussion about CPH collaboration is something that people would like to hear more about. Yes?
I think that also the separate, well, I guess it is collaboration, so infrastructure would come under that collaboration. Okay.
So let's collaborate, CPH collaboration, yes.
I would maybe go beyond that and say, Cal Poly, and city roles, because I think it's not just collaboration.
For the
Well, it
purpose
seems
of,
to me like in a discussion about collaboration, that would be an opportunity for us to sort of flesh out some of those
Sure,
questions.
okay.
Can I ask a process question real quick?
Of course.
I'm just a little concerned that the inputs might be just running on ahead of, so far, how far we've gotten, and it's 8:30, and I just wonder if we're gonna get to the next phase of this opportunity.
I think we get as far as we
tonight.
get, and I think part of this is the transparency of specifically asking whether or not we want to discuss
All
the
right.
questions that the public is bringing
Then
up.
can the commission stay really focused on, if we've already addressed it, let's just move?
And maybe keep our answers to yes or no.
Yes
Do
or
you
no,
want to
and
hear
move.
more information? Yes or no? And then we can discuss this all, and will discuss it all later. Okay, I've lost track of where we were. Transparency in business and monetary links between the company doing this project and people promoting it. I'm going to say no, because there is no company at this point doing this project. It's the city in conjunction with all of us as residents trying to address our housing crisis. My vote is no.
I totally agree, and we've already addressed the same topic.
Kim? Christian?
Christian, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yeah, I said no.
Oh, okay.
Let's
Sorry,
move forward.
Got it. That's 3 no's. Kim, do you need to hear more about that?
I think we covered it in the earlier one.
Okay, let's say no and keep moving. Planning commission should be reflective of the majority of the community first and foremost. I'm not even sure what to say. I think honestly that the planning commission, I would say no. We've got a wide diversity of opinion here where there's a lot we don't agree about, but I appreciate that we have good discussions. I
I
would
just
say
think
no.
they're referring to community engagement again,
Which we've addressed.
which we've addressed.
Covered. No. Public process transparency, definitely, same, covered. City needs to buy land for wastewater treatment plant relocation before zoning changes triple land values.
We've addressed. That
Addressed.
would be a subset. We already addressed wastewater.
No. Can you scroll up, David?
To which point?
I can't see anything past 109.
Oh, I was just trying to catch a
I think we're
majority-
saying that
majority vote.
wastewater treatment plant, we've already pegged that for a discussion, and that this discussion would be part of that.
Yeah, I caught 2 votes, Christian, Kimberly, and
No. Yeah, let's move on.
Oh,
Okay. 6, 5, and 4 stories make sense for Arcata and hope will be supported by most in our community. That's what we're trying to do. This is already covered in our discussions. No. Okay. City needs to buy land for parks.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to round out the vote. We got a couple.
I'm assuming that if no one speaks, they're in agreement with the majority. Maybe that's not a safe assumption. I think, is everyone in agreement that we're already incorporated a number of discussions that will address 6, 5, and 4 stories making sense for Arcata?
Yes.
Do you agree
Yeah,
with
we
that, Julie?
eliminated 8. We're starting at 7. So no. Continue.
I think that it's subsumed in what we're already discussing here.
Moving on. City needs to buy land for parks before zoning changes triple land values.
There there is in the revised version of the draft plan a policy item about city land acquisition efforts and resources. It's something that I have suggested, and so some more information about that policy
Just for expediency,
could
can we
be,
just say yes or no if we want more discussion
Yes.
on an item?
yes,
Thank you.
could be
Yes.
useful.
Dan, yes?
I'm a no on that one.
I wouldn't frame it that way, though. I would put an item on there about publicly owned open space, which hasn't really appeared on this list that we have before us.
So are we looking at land acquisition?
Yes. Do you want,
Let's just say land acquisition.
I would just say, yeah, land acquisition and public open space ownership, or something like that.
and you're a no on that discussion or a yes?
I mean, yes, that's what I was
Judith is
suggesting.
yes, Kim is a yes, Dan, you're a no?
I'll go yes now that it's land acquisition in general.
Let's put land acquisition on the list.
And that's a yes for me.
Thank you. Process and substance have been hijacked by a small group of activists that do not represent the city. That's a no for me. Does anyone feel they need to discuss that?
I'm going to say no because that's why we're doing this right now.
Judith, yes or no?
No.
No for Christian.
Thank you, Christian. The Planning Commission seems unable to move forward any significant action to address the housing crisis and the climate crisis. Can often feel like that, but I think we're making some progress this evening. I don't think we need to add this to the list of things we need to hear more about. I'm a no on this.
No.
Judith?
No.
Christian?
Nope.
Where are the sources for infrastructure funding upgrades? I think that's a fair question, but is encapsulated in some of the items that we've already identified for further discussion. So I'm going to say answered above. Or
Could I just ask, we've talked about infrastructure for the wastewater treatment plant. We've talked about it for the fire district, but there are other infrastructure.
we talked about transportation. We talked about business impacts. I could think of a variety of different places in which infrastructure funding upgrades will be part of the discussion.
I agree, it's well phrased there, but we really
Important.
covered
I also want to point out that you're going to be talking about all of these things generally through the process. The question is, do you want to have further discussion tonight or at a follow-up meeting related to this work tonight so that you could identify additional resources to bring to bear on this decision-making process?
That we think we're not going to already get in other items we've already pegged for
Yeah,
discussion.
and you could decide on that in the next phase. So if you're concerned that you're not going to have, water infrastructure, for example, we can have that discussion.
Judith?
I think it's already subsumed in one of the items that we've said yes to.
Yeah, agreed. Included above. 122 artist live workspace.
I kind of feel like that one, well, it's not, but, we have gentrification and some of the other affordable housing and all kinds of stuff that's easily will morph into that same discussion, but if anybody wants specifically art live workspace discussion, presentation,
Did we have a particular area? We do, of workforce housing in general.
Well, we discussed affordable housing and
But that is separate. Workforce housing, artist live workspace is different than, it's a subcategory. Hopefully it would be affordable.
okay. So you're a yes for wanting to hear more about that, Kim?
Yes.
Dan?
yes.
Christian?
I kind of feel like it's discussed above. Maybe we can incorporate it as a subsection of things that we're discussing regarding affordability, gentrification. I feel no because we're discussing it above.
Okay, thank you. Judith, yes or no?
I think it's incorporated in things that we will be discussing and getting more information about.
I agree. So I think given that, I think we can just peg that as incorporated above or however you've been detailing that, David.
Could I ask, David, when these are being incorporated, are you making notes and making them a sub of, another subcategory so they don't fall between the cracks and we're tracking it?
This is going to be an enduring record. We're going to post it on our website. You'll have access to it.
generating a list right now
You can come
that-
back to any of these topics. You can expand on the topics. Again, we're just trying to get something on the table to keep it moving forward.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, and per Dan's observation earlier, how many more? How far? What is the end of this list?
We are close to the end. I'm going back and double checking. I believe the poll is still open.
Yeah, the poll's still open, and there are a couple more I'm flagging once Dave is done.
Okay, design standards limiting housing production. I think that's an important question, but I think we've got that covered in a couple of, at least, of the items we've already pegged for discussion. So I'm going to say no, or incorporated above.
I would say incorporated above.
Incorporated.
Incorporated above.
Okay, so let's, Kim,
I will concur.
thank you. Separate gateway area plan from the general plan 2045, and I can only read as far as go with specific.
Yes.
They go with a specific plan or something else. I think this was addressed in a comment earlier to break these up for considerations around recusals and whatnot.
I don't remember addressing this topic. If we're being redundant, then I don't want to hear it again, but I just don't remember it.
We haven't addressed this on this list. We've addressed this, I believe, ad infinitum in the public discourse to date. We're currently on the gateway plan being an element of the general plan and the form-based code being a form-based code. Those are the decisions that, I think have been made. Certainly, any of the choices that you've made previously, we can go back and revisit them. That's the purpose of this process. But at some point, we have to make forward progress, by making these decisions and then making the next set of decisions that go along with those.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking back on our 10 months of general discussions. I thought we were just going by the list, so I don't need a further presentation on it.
I don't need anything more on this. That's a no. Judith?
I don't need to hear more information on it. It could be in some future time that the city council may want to address this with us.
That's a yes?
It's actually a no.
It's a no. Okay. Kim? You said yes. Sorry. Christian, is this something you want to hear more about?
Nope.
Okay. I think the no's have it there. I'm sorry, David. I lost track of what I
Bring WIOT into the discussion.
Yes,
got it.
absolutely.
128. Bring WIOT into the discussion. Commissioners want to have more
Yes.
discussion here?
Yes.
Yes. I'll say yes. Kim's a yes. Let's put that on the list. Christian, just
Yep.
okay.
Okay, and I'm going to check in. Do we have others to add to the list? I've been trying to capture what I've seen.
Yeah, I think there are a couple other ones. Requirements for solar was near the bottom. I'm not sure if that's already captured somewhere else on the list. I think shading is, so maybe that's redundant.
Isn't that state law now?
Yeah, requirements for solar. I guess that, yeah.
I wonder if we could add a general reference to the form-based code and energy design standards, and then say that, yeah, we are planning to address that.
Yeah, and I think that's the direction we're headed and required by law. So if that's, we would,
So is staff saying that this is something that's already part of code?
Certainly there are requirements for solar on new builds. And then in addition, we've had discussions around incentivizing, buildings to go above and beyond up to and including having, microgrids and those sorts of things that would be, way above and beyond. So some of that is in the document. If you, again, want to have a conversation about that, highlight to the public where those are listed, and then decide that you've got enough in your tool belt to address those questions, you can certainly continue to have that discussion. But yeah, I agree with Dilo. It's already incorporated.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to me, but I don't think I need an expanded discussion about it. I would say no.
I would say no too.
Judith, yes or no?
Yes, as long as we are going to discuss it explicitly when we talk about the codes and the community benefits program, then it's incorporated there already.
Christian?
I would say no.
Say, no.
Okay.
Okay, and then there are a couple more. So one was need scientific survey. I'm not sure if that would fall under community engagement or if there's a need to explicitly articulate that one.
Could you say that again, Dilo?
Yeah, need scientific survey.
I don't see that under community engagement. I think that's a separate issue. Yes.
Yeah, I still don't quite understand what the needs scientific survey meaning.
Of the
I think-
community.
I see.
on Gateway in general, or
Thank you.
Okay, so the vote on that was,
So we're calling this statistically valid survey? Is that?
That's what I wrote, but I can call it whatever you want to call it.
Okay,
I
I'm just
think-
making sure that's the same thing that we just said.
I think that we're wanting something that is more quantitative than qualitative, which is what we did in January, and that I'm hearing from the community that they'd like it to go out to all residents.
personally, I would put that under the community engagement umbrella, because I think it exactly fits there.
And public process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say incorporated above would be my vote.
Yeah, and this is something, again, that, I think could be a potential outcome. If you recall, from the original discussion, that may be a solution set, it's been suggested by
Right.
community. So this, if you're okay with that, I would drag this into the solution set column.
Please. You okay with that, Judith?
Yeah.
Christian, does that sound okay to you?
Sounds good to me.
All right. So does that bring us to the end of?
oh ho, no it doesn't. Nope,
Oh.
you got a couple more. Okay, only a
And I
few
think,
though, I'm
I think for
sorry.
the sake of process, we're going to stop
We should-
taking new additions
Yeah,
at
we
this
should-
point.
we
So
need
we're
to
going to
stop so
finalize
we
the
can
few
move
that you
on.
have there.
Yeah, I think I might be able to just.
Can we
yeah,
close
hit
the
stop.
poll?
Deactivate topic, okay, great.
Okay, lay them on me, we'll lay
Okay.
them all out, and then they'll come back and
Okay,
discuss them.
identify all types and sizes of wetlands. That's one, and then the next is finance district. And then the last is standards that would limit housing production. And those are what I captured that we did not yet have.
Okay, the
So-
finance district, I think, is incorporated above. There were some that were slight nuances to, there were a lot of discussion, for example, in the comments about, this size building or that size building. I didn't incorporate all of those because you're discussing the building heights. What was and so the finance district is also incorporated in a prior discussion. What was the last one?
Standards that would limit housing production, which also could fall under, I think, some of the other topics that are already on the board.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say, and certainly identify all wetlands is going to be a core part of the EIR.
Yeah, that's all EIR and state law. right?
So let's go through them. Well, we're up to, are we at 133 energy design standards in the form-based code?
I
Yeah,
feel
this
like-
was recommended by Commissioner Mayer.
Well, is that not?
That was the more general category that the energy things would come under, rather than a separate item.
So it
and-
sounds like we don't need that as a separate item and that maybe it's going to be covered in other discussions in your mind?
Totally agree.
Great, so I think we can statistically valid survey. I think we're saying part
That's
of
it.
public process discussion we've already identified. identify all wetlands, clearly part of the EIR. Don't need more discussion on that as far as I'm concerned. We know we're going to discuss it a lot.
Excuse me, one of the questions that came up had to do not just with the general wetland identification that would happen in an EIR, but actual wetland delineations, which are more detailed and usually beyond the scope of an EIR if they haven't already been done. And I would actually like to have some more discussion of that, because I think it
Okay, can staff give us some sense of whether or not identifying all wetlands would that or would that not be part of the process that's already mapped out?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely not part of the process that we have mapped out currently. What we intend to do currently is to identify the wetlands in the complex that's in the Barrel District that we have proposed for enhancement and potential, wetland banking. That we would, identify those wetlands and then identify the areas that we would see as being viable for restoration opportunities. You can certainly discuss this. The preview to what staff's recommendation would be in terms of that is to not do this. Again, it would be, throwing good money after bad, because we could go and identify all the wetlands that are extant now, but wetlands change over time. And so if we identify every wetland that's in the area now and no one develops for 10 years, the wetlands will likely change. And so there's no good effect to identify them now.
Go ahead, Christian.
We do have a no net loss of wetlands policy, though, that was listed in the draft. And so I'd like more information. That's what we're talking
Judith
about
is a
here.
yes on
I'm a yes.
discussing.
About how the plan should address this.
Okay,
But
that's a
the wetland no less law,
No
the
net
whole
loss.
wetland standard essentially is set by state law and set by the State Water Resource Control Board. So it's driven by regulatory policy. And just like David was saying, any wetland investigation at this time, in addition to botanical surveys, have a shelf life. And so I don't know if that's the best bang for our buck in regards of utilizing city resources.
So I'm taking that as a
because
no.
it may not be valid. It may not be valid in 5 years.
Is that a no, Christian?
That is a big no for me.
Okay,
And it's a no for me.
that's a no for me as well. Kim? That's 3-2, I think. Standards that would limit housing production.
That's addressed above.
Yeah, addressed above, agreed. Is everyone comfortable with that, addressed above? Christian, are you comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable with that.
Kimberly?
Apparently I'm rummy again. Could you point out where that was addressed above?
I think there's probably in the discussion of form-based code, in discussion of addressing building height, I can think of a couple of different places where we're going to certainly explicitly deal with standards that would limit housing production. I mean, I think everything in the form-based code is going to amount to a standard that's going to, in some ways, limit housing production.
Yeah, or it could potentially limit housing production. I think I'm maybe reading into the statement, but I think the concern is that you'll develop standards that are actually going to limit housing production, but we need to increase housing production. So I could be reading that wrong, but that's the way I took it.
And this final, I thought I stopped the poll, but they're still coming. There's someone that said the concern about view sheds of the bay was on the list, maybe not captured. Do we want to just add that one since we're here?
Let's add that, and then let's cut this off and move on to the next portion of this discussion, as it's now 8:45 almost. Scroll up, David. Can you scroll up just so I can see the bottom of that? view sheds of the bay. Is this something that people want more discussion about?
Well, it definitely comes into the building height, and a subcategory of that, no question.
Agreed. So addressed above. You comfortable with that, Dan?
That's my opinion.
Kimberly, addressed above, feel good to you?
As long as we address it, I'm good.
Okay, well, we'll have this list to work off of. Christian, are you comfortable that view sheds of the bay are going to be addressed above?
I feel they're addressed above and they're considered as aesthetic analysis in CEQA.
Thank you. Judith?
Yeah, if they are incorporated, we just have to make sure that we get to talk about them before the EIR.
Okay. So given that, it looks like we're at the end of this portion of the exercise this evening. We do, well, the next, David, can you just talk about exactly where we're going to go from here now? Because as we're approaching 9 o'clock, maybe we want to think about how much further into this process we want to get before we wrap for the evening.
Yeah, I think that's probably wise. We have,
This feels like kind of an organic stopping point.
yeah, probably another couple hours at least to get through this material. So again, I'll make the offer. I'll buy the pizza if you want to stick around. But yeah, it's probably not worth trying to sort of crack into the next step of this. I mean, I guess the question would be, do you want to schedule a special meeting?
Yes.
And if so, we can look for some times next week that work for everyone, and I'll try and find a venue. Commissioner Mayer is shaking her head, absolutely not.
I think given the continuity of the process, if we're going to need to remember what happened tonight in order to go to the next step, I'd way rather keep going tonight than schedule something next week.
Well, I just don't think we're going to be able to make very much more progress before we get to the point in our meetings where everyone's sort of flagging, and I don't want us to be trying to work through this with fading attention spans.
Vice Chair, can I make a recommendation? Can we take a
Please.
5-minute break?
That sounds like a good idea.
There you go. That's how we get to the next step. Appreciate it.
The challenge therein is if we're really going to wrap by 9, a 5-minute break is
Yeah.
3 minutes to 9 or something.
I guess
This may be a request for a bio break, so I just put it
Right.
out there. Maybe
Right.
a quick break.
let's
Even
have
if
a
we-
quick break and then discuss how much further we want to get this evening. 5 minutes. Okay, we're back on after that break. Thank you, everyone. We finished the first part of our planned progress this evening, and David, do you have a suggestion about how we might make a short decision about making some proposals about some of the items we identified so that we can make a little bit of progress left this evening?
Yeah, I think, I'm really interested to hear the feedback on how the process went tonight for various folks. Certainly not right now, and I'm sure we will get that feedback. The intent was to get to a point where you could make some recommendations to the council for resources that you as a commission feel like you need to continue to make your decisions. Because we didn't get to that point with the entire process that we have laid out. Certainly if the commissioners want to, initiate some suggestions for a couple of key things that we can move forward, given what we know now, operating under this, the 7654 is sort of the revision that we'll make to the draft plan, and that coming with, these impacts, and therefore we need these resources, with that in mind. So certainly that's something you could do, and then we'll continue the process at a later.
Can we look at the list and try and maybe as a group come up with maybe 6 areas where we want to get more resources?
Would it be more resources or just how we get from, what is it we need, right? Whether it be resources or...
I mean, I think we're going to need a lot of resources to deal with a lot of these things. If we can perhaps try and prioritize the most important things, and then we can get a request for more resources for how we can resolve some of the concerns around those issues, I would say that might give us some progress on the second portion of this exercise this evening before we wrap.
Okay, if we're looking for 6, can I just throw out 5 that I think would jump right off of that list and be something that we might all want to just
Please.
start to consider? Building height. And is that number 1 on the list? Could you scroll down just a hair there?
This
Or
is,
isn't?
this is
Okay.
the top.
Okay. Sea level rise, the liquefaction, buildability, geology, however you want to phrase that.
Yep,
Home ownership issues. And then traffic plan, walkability, bikeability, multimodal issues.
I would like to add the wastewater treatment to that list.
Can I add that we definitely need more resources to address the details of the form-based code?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I have a question. I'm wondering if we can get a resource for resources. So can we go to city council to approve funds so that we can make these things happen? Isn't that like something?
That's what we're trying to do this evening.
Okay. So when we're asking about resources, is this the time that we would make our request of who we would like to have as far as experts, or is that later, or I'm just wanting to make sure. I had my list some time ago, and they're not really the same as these guys.
David, can you take that question?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Okay. Then from what I wrote down, we have 6 main issues that we've identified: sea level rise, liquefaction and geotech, home ownership, bikeability and multimodal transportation, form-based code, and the wastewater treatment plant. That, to me, that sounds like a pretty strong 6 list to start with. Judith?
We had started out in the exercise with the L Street at the bottom. We need more information, but that doesn't necessarily mean we need money from the council. And we also need information about financing for infrastructure, but again, that doesn't necessarily require funds from the council, but it certainly requires a great deal more information. So I know that those were the next two steps. One was information and one was resources, i.e. money. But I think to make sure that those things don't fall off a priority list just because they're not going to cost money for the council to allocate is
Yeah.
important.
Correct me if I'm wrong, if we say we went through these one at a time, would we not be now trying to generate the sub-list of what it is we need, whether it be resources or information from other sources? I don't know.
Yeah, David, what would the recommended next steps be if we had a sort of condensed for this evening, knowing that we're going to have to dig into this further at our next meeting? If we could identify 6 topics, what would be the next step?
Yeah, I think, some of these have a little bit of overlap. So the form-based code is going to cover a lot of different areas. We had put together the scope that we are currently under with regards to the form-based code, as well as a proposed additional scope that could be, could be included to get more engagement and also, more refinement in the form-based code itself. So, more graphics, et cetera. And so that, I guess, is an example of something that if you said, with regard to the things that have overlap with form-based code, we want to recommend the council approve, either the scope that's in, the staff report tonight or, adopt some additional scope to get more engagement and a better form-based code at the end of the day. I mean, we're going to have a good one the way that we have it planned now, but we want a better one. That would be an actionable outcome from the discussion that you've had tonight that overlaps real closely with prior conversations you've had as well. Wastewater treatment plant capacity, I think, would require a much more in-depth discussion, or the vulnerability pieces, than you probably have time for tonight, because I'd want to cover all of the items that we have, all the studies that we have in hand, what we propose to have by the time we're done with the EIR, so that you could really, as a commission, identify, here are the gaps that we think we see.
And it way overlaps with sea level rise, right?
It does in a lot of respects. There's kind of a capacity issue and then an adaptive issue. And we can certainly bring back, I think from this list, staff can bring those conversation points back as agenda items, specific items to discuss in your next gateway discussion, so that you can flesh that out in a little bit more detail.
Could I add anything? I know that some people said we were stopping at 6. So I don't know if this is going to be covered later, but I was hoping that the council would approve a standard of cover for an assessment, risk assessment for the fire district department, or the Arcata Fire District, that's what I'm trying to say. And I have a list of resources, 'cause I thought we were supposed to have them before we did this. So whether they're used or not, I would sure love to just share them, but they're more of like who I would like to see as far as experts be invited. So is that something that I can share?
Well, I think,
You gave me homework. I want to turn my
Right.
homework in.
well, as often happens with these meetings, we don't always get as far as we think we're going to get. So even if we put together a list that we identify as priority issues we want to discuss, it doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to go through the rest of the list and find out how we're going to get answers to those questions, including fire and all the other kind of questions. We're after 9 o'clock now. We're not going to get through that whole list, so I'm not trying to suggest by shortening this process this evening that we're not going to continue to get through that list. I was just hoping that we could at least pick some highest priorities so that we make some progress on the recommendation part, or a request part for the issues that we think are the more important before we adjourn this meeting. Go ahead, Judith.
Yeah, I think one action we can make tonight would be to request that staff bring our request to the city council for resources to address a list of topics. And I think that in terms of figuring out how much specifics would cost, that may be something that we can go high on, and I don't know that it is the job of our commission to put a dollar amount on the resources that we're requesting from council, but certainly asking staff to make that request to them and then coming up with potential scopes of work that those would cover is something that we can do tonight. And I think rather than putting it off another 2 weeks and then waiting around to come back and still not being able to address the substance of what we need to do would be a problem. And so I'd like to propose that we request that staff address our need for additional resources for more expertise and information to council. And presumably then the council would direct staff to figure out what that involves. But we would
So-
need to get an affirmative response from council that resources up to a given level may be available.
So are you suggesting that we do that generally on these, like, say, 6 categories that we just kind of outlined as the hot topics off of that list, or the whole list?
6 or 8 or the whole list. I think that if we're not coming up with specific amounts, and that staff is going to be able to help us weight them in terms of how much it's going to cost, that we can basically send this list and say that these have all been identified as areas where we need more information, and to request available resources for them without necessarily having to specify the amount at this point. That's something I think that staff can help with.
David, does that sound workable? Or how would that work from a staff perspective? Would that be enough direction for you to go to city council? Would that be the next outcome from us selecting 6 items from this list that we need more resources or discussion about?
Let me make sure I understand the task. So you identify 6 or 8, and then staff identifies the scopes that would address those 6 or 8 and make that request to the city council. Did I capture that?
That could work, as long as it doesn't mean that we're not going to address the others.
It would definitely mean that, it would not mean that we wouldn't address the others. I think the question is, we may be able to answer some of our questions with a review of material that we already have.
Right.
Like when it comes to wastewater or sea level rise, we may be able to schedule time to review materials in many cases that we've already had before us, and that may answer our questions. I think form-based code is a piece where we need the most help and we have the least existing sort of resources on it. So I guess part of the job for staff then would be to identify which areas, possibly like sea level rise, we've already got studies that we can bring to that discussion, and which areas, most certainly like form-based code, are going to require some additional spend on the part of the city council.
So can I ask a question, because I'm lost in the process? We were asked as a planning commission to give input, but we covered with just 2 planning commissioners, 6 of them. Is there any way to still add one on there? Or maybe it's there and I'm not seeing it, but I really feel like we need resources from the Arcata Fire District. I know we talked about doing the study, but is it in there?
Yeah, so I added your standards of coverage study to the list of possible solution sets here. Certainly if I think that there's a more detailed discussion, than we can have tonight on that particular item that we would need to have before the commission as a whole would recommend that as a, something that you feel like you need to finalize your decision. Of the things that are listed here, but we are tracking it, so it's definitely on the list.
Could I just ask one more question, because I might forget it?
Yeah.
I know that you addressed saying that the survey would be one of the solutions that would be identified after. So this isn't the time to say that's a resource that we need? Because,
You certainly could, yeah.
it's a monetary thing, and if there's going to be money decisions, if it's not included, then it's not going to be funded. So I'd like to make sure that that's at least in there.
But tonight is not the only time we're gonna look at this list and discuss
I
the
know, but I
positions.
didn't only put one in. I'd like to add a second one if I could.
Yeah, I think that, the list, again, we didn't get to the portion of this hearing where you would go through and vote on each of the solution sets to decide whether you want to include that or not. So I think if you want to take some action tonight, you should find some solution sets that, the majority and hopefully, consensus, that you would come to consensus on, that we want to recommend these as moving forward actions. And then we can have a follow-up where we continue this discussion to flesh out the stuff that needs more dialogue. I would say with regard to what's on the list right now, we're going to find, staff is going to certainly recommend that, these 4 topic areas, liquefaction, sea level rise, wastewater treatment, and capacity and vulnerability, we have information in the record or are preparing information in the record to address all of the concerns, and we do not believe that we need an additional study for these. We think that through, the studies that we have, conversations with staff, and potentially, with some of these topic areas, bringing forward, some experts to have conversations with the Planning Commission, you're going to get to a point where you feel you can make decisions. So I don't think that there's necessarily a heavy lift on, each of these items is going to have a staff capacity issue. They're all going to have some, financial element, but none of these are heavy lifts.
So we're not excluding bringing in experts. That's going to be part of the solution.
Yeah, but exactly. I
We
think
don't,
that
you want us to identify that tonight, you said.
You have not gotten to the point yet, though, with each of these topic areas where you can say, this is specifically the solution that I want. For each of these topic areas, liquefaction and geotech, you may say, I'm pretty comfortable with the list of items that we have planned here to address this topic. It'd be great to have, a geologic engineer come and talk to us about this, just so that we can hear, from their perspective. So then we could work to bring that forward. You haven't had that conversation yet. We don't have an item in mind for how we address that. From staff's perspective, we've already addressed that topic. We feel like that question has been answered. If there's still an open question in the commission's mind and you feel like there's something that you need, a resource that you need to close that loop, or if you feel like through the process of trying to show the work that you've done to the community, those are perfectly valid reasons for asking for additional resources, then you should identify those. I can't walk away from this meeting knowing that you want more on liquefaction and geotech and know specifically how to address that for you. We're going to need to have a follow-up conversation for that. If you tell me I want the form-based code to be, put forward as a recommendation to include that additional scope, that's clear direction for me. I know exactly what to do to effectuate that. So they're on different levels.
So, might we, as a group right now, just want to tackle 1 or 2 of these and see if we can just flesh out so that you have more direct?
That'd be great.
I think that's
information?
better, because I don't
Okay.
think we're gonna have time to propose the solutions and the resources we need to get through more than 1 or 2.
So which
And
1 or 2 do you guys
I
want?
think we should start with form-based code myself and make a request that we get expanded time from the city's consultant to help us incorporate concerns about architecture. Just all the, that just feels like the biggest piece. And I think it's going to answer a lot of questions for the planning commission, but also the public.
First, I think maybe given the scope of it, we should stop calling it the form-based code and call it the gateway code, because a number of the things that you've identified don't have to do with, that outward-facing form. They're basically code. And I think it would be a relatively simple thing to go through our list and identify a list of things that would need to be addressed in code with expertise that would require some outside facilitation that would then cost the city money, and to ask staff to request it on our behalf from the city council.
So then I'd like to request Heather Equinos as an outside facilitator. Is that what we're talking about?
I think basically the city has engaged a consultant who has then engaged some subcontractors.
Heather is our current consultant.
Yeah, to provide help in discussing and writing and reviewing the code. And that at this point, we don't really need to go a whole lot further than that to request help in the form of additional money from council. And that staff is pretty well able to figure out how much that would involve at a minimum.
So you've identified form-based or gateway code as important for you. I feel like what's important for me is to address the sea level rise and wastewater treatment plant or an infrastructure, which would include the Arcata Fire District.
It's not so much that we don't think those are important. The question is, I don't know that we have time this evening to say, these are all of the things we need to be able to answer our concerns about sea level rise.
I'm ready with my list.
I would like to, on the form-based code, I didn't know that we got closure on it. Hear from staff whether or not you feel like you have enough direction. I know we're being pretty vague, and it's partly because we don't know what will get us from here to there on form-based code.
I think I hear a proposal on the table. I hear general support for it, but it'd be great to get, an action on that and say, yes, we're going to request that the city council
All right.
do
Can
this.
Just for clarity, will Ben Noble be coming up here? Is he the best person to, be here, giving us a presentation and doing a question and answer kind of thing? Or is that already in the plan? I'm a little vague about that.
I don't know, Ben, if you're not asleep, if you want to address some of that, we have discussed it a little bit, so. Go ahead, Ben.
I am not asleep, but I am trying to turn my camera on, if I can do that. This is interesting. Sorry.
While Ben's finding the camera, we'll say.
Okay.
Oh,
Here we
there
go.
it is.
Right. So I'm here. I guess David asked me to be here tonight to help answer any questions that you might have about how to move forward on this.
Yeah, and I think the question was, would you come up and do sessions in person here, with this expanded scope?
Right. Yeah, I'm happy to do that if we think that that's a good use of the budget. It's certainly something that I can do. I think there's a benefit to being in person for meetings to help go through a lot of these details. So I think that that's certainly something that we can include in the scope if it's a priority. I think another part of this is having the design support and the graphic support to prepare the graphic materials that are going to help to sort of facilitate a discussion of what it is exactly that we want to regulate through the gateway code, and then also to illustrate those standards in a way that's easy for the user to understand. So I think that would be potentially a beneficial add-on as well.
Can we get that into, does that need to be a motion that we are going to make? Or what's the best way for us to transmit that to you to transmit to the city council?
Yeah, I think, again, a motion and a formal vote would be a perfectly fine way of doing that, and the motion would be something to the effect of, the planning commission, you move to make a recommendation to the city council that they authorize additional scope with the form-based code to increase engagement and, work product.
Does someone want to make that motion?
I'll
Could I
make
just,
that motion. Oh, sorry,
I
Karen.
just wanted to ask a question. I know that you said that in-person was ideal. I guess my question is, how much more is it going to eat up the budget by having in-person versus doing a Zoom with supportive graphics and all the charts and everything that we need? Just trying to weigh that.
Ben, do you have a quick response to that?
Yeah, I would say that that the additional cost for in-person meetings is probably a couple $1,000s per meeting as opposed to a Zoom meeting.
And so we can flesh that out also as we go through the process, specifically what those, what that scope would look like. We had discussed last time, I think, if I remember correctly, Commissioner Tagney had brought forward the question about having the next form-based code engagements as a planning commission session. Like, would it be possible to have them as a planning commission? And, certainly the answer is yes. I mean, we had designed them, differently, partially because they're on Zoom, but I think we're kind of demonstrating that we can, we can do these hybrid meetings and more complex hybrid meetings. So if that's of interest to the planning commission, we could, make sure that those happen and build that also into the ongoing form-based code engagement if we expand that scope. And some of those could be in person if it was, desirable.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to ask if someone had a motion to make that request.
I think that the substance of what we would be doing is more important than the format. Actually, it could be that, if we would get Ben Noble up here, it would be more worth our while to do a day-long workshop than, to ask him to travel for a 2-hour evening meeting, and that the forms of those workshops that's something that we can discuss at a future meeting. But I would like to introduce a motion to direct staff to request resources to develop with outside expertise in a scope of work to expand funding to develop the Gateway Code.
In the form of a workshop.
No, I'm not gonna specify the
Details to
form.
follow.
I think that's something we should discuss
I'll
later.
second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 A quick question, follow-up question on that, just in terms of our next steps. I'm assuming this means we don't want to move forward with any of the workshops that were outlined in the
I
stuff.
Yeah, we could-
I
I don't
think I
think
was
so.
thinking above and beyond those workshops.
In
Okay, so
addition.
in addition to, okay.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move forward with those for now.
Yeah.
Correct.
Point of clarity, is he coming up for those workshops?
At this point, we don't have them scheduled to come up. We don't have a
Okay,
budget
so
for
this
that
would
currently.
be a separate, all right. If it helped for us to schedule what we're requesting back to back with something else he needs to do here anyway, that would be nice.
And it sounds like they will not be at planning commission unless there's a motion for that, because we do want to start planning for it now.
We can work out the details later. I think we have a motion and a second,
And a vote.
and you're all in favor. And so then you do want to reserve some time to have public comment before you close this. Certainly, you can time limit it. We had, public participation through the process, but want to make sure that you are mindful of that as well.
Yeah, I would like to shift to taking public comment now and picking this discussion back up at our next meeting. Does staff need something more on that, David?
Nope.
Okay. Given that, I will move to public comment. And as it's 9:30, I think I will limit that to 2 minutes. If there's anybody here or online that would like to make comments.
Hello. Obviously, this has been a very long night. I appreciate all the discourse and discussion. I think this is in the right direction. And I do think it's a good idea to move forward with some, maybe a little bit more interactive when the public's involved in the form-based code process, just so I felt like the first forum, or whatever we would call it, with Ben Noble was really helpful, because it started to flesh out some discussion and things were asked, and I think it can come in at a certain level where the public can get engaged and it won't hamper. I think it can actually inform, and a few things can be worked out without slowing the process down. So hopefully that'll come through, because otherwise the second one seemed more like a webinar, and I don't think it was as helpful. I mean, a little bit of things came through, and I think it was good education level for people who are getting their first look at it. But for somebody who had already been involved, I felt it was a little bit of a step backwards. So I think this, moving forward, that'll be a step in the right direction. And then I guess in the Slido poll tonight, I think the one reference to the community engagements at the community center, that 2-day event that was pointed out there, was more the fact that because it didn't really get fleshed out when you guys were talking about it, was there was, and however you tabulate it, a lot of people are tabulated as showing that the interest at that meeting at that point was that it was for 4 stories. And I think that was a point that was being made. And also with the Slido that came across, and a number of people who did also state the point for 4 stories. And I know you've got to think about the community and what's going to work for, ultimately for building, and what's going to work. But I think that has to be taken into account when you do land on a number. So hopefully this was just an exercise tonight, and you're still maybe thinking about what that number is you might land on, in certain areas slightly higher, but consider those really high buildings right now is not, I think, what's coming across for most people. Anyway, thanks again. It was a really healthy discussion tonight.
Thank you very much.
The issue that you're not addressing is the Coastal Commission, and I emailed you all as far as the specific law regarding their position that the height of the buildings are very important from the standpoint that they clearly want a vision of the bay. So I think you're on a collision course with the Coastal Commission, and I think they've also expressed this in the North Coast Journal on September 29th when they were talking about the Snyder project, and they specifically, the office here with the manager Melissa Kramer, brought this issue up and quoted that. So if they're having an issue with a 1-story building with visuals on the bay, they're certainly going to have a problem with what you're doing here by tentatively approving 7 stories. So, I know that this is a big concern of theirs, and it's not being addressed at all. You seem to just think that this is your call, but the Coastal Commission will be involved in the coastal zone, and so this is going to be something that has to go through them. So how can you go ahead and approve that without even having a conversation? So I'm a little confused why, early on you just didn't have a rough conversation as far what are the parameters of this. You've had a lot of conversations with the wastewater treatment plant and talked to their staff, I know that, but in this particular case, you haven't done that. So it seems like a big gamble, and a lot of time is going into this, and you're going to be probably denied if it's really at 7 stories and 6 stories. So thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yes, good evening. Thanks for all the work you're doing. I'm going to be real quick. I think one of the issues here is of public perception, not facts. David said, from the staff's perspective, we feel these questions have already been answered. That may be true, but not to the public's satisfaction. Such as the community engagement report, he says it was not compiled the way they would have liked it to be compiled. I disagree. It's disingenuous to say that. I think it was not compiled one little bit. The building and massing presentation, number 3, I think needs to be removed. It has a map and discussion of vacant properties that are not vacant. I wrote, city staff is not telling the whole story. That's a little too brief. But as an example, street parking. What's shown in the previous the December draft plan and the current draft plan is what David calls a high level. It's not an actual quantity of streets. You can count them. I can count them. There's a reduction, I think, of about 40% of street parking, but someone needs to do it. If not me, then staff. The new draft has no visualizations. I was hoping for some 3D modeling in there. There's a blank page in the December draft and continue to blank page now. The colors are good, but it requires a color printer. I know it would be a little more work for staff, but if it could be added the initials of the committee following each comment, that would be helpful. The actual line from the 4th sentence of the Brown Act, the people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. I think that this draft plan should be held back for another 2 weeks or so until all the information can be in it, not partial information, not just the information that comports, which is a terrible word in my opinion, comports with the previous draft plan. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anybody online, David?
Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, everyone. This is Matt Simmons. I'm with the Redwood Coalition for Climate and Environmental Responsibility. About a year ago, Rga wrote a letter about the gateway process that warned that we were heading towards a series of meetings that didn't go anywhere. It feels like that letter came true. I think we all just sat through a 3.5-hour meeting about what future meetings to have. I think if you continue to meet at the pace you've been meeting at and you go through all the topics you just talked about, this plan won't be approved until like 2025, maybe? I don't know, because if the standard is everyone has to be happy with everything in the plan, it'll just never be approved. And, you know, all the meantime, the housing affordability crisis and the climate crisis are going to continue. You know, people are going to keep getting priced out because we aren't building enough housing to keep up with demand. And people aren't going to be able to walk and bike to work. And, you know, people will just move farther away and drive to their jobs. And we'll just have more traffic and more greenhouse gas emissions. And I just don't feel like anyone in this room is hearing any of that or thinking about any of that. And I don't understand why. So yeah, those are my comments. Bye.
Thanks, Matt. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hello, thank you. 3 things, I'll try to keep them brief, is 1, I believe this meeting with the Slido was a good step forward because it allowed for some compilation of the different things that people are talking about. Second thing is that the January meeting being input to the public record, I believe is people want that because it's in the public record. It's great that Fred compiled it because it's of interest, but it's actually the city's job to record it. And then number 3, I think one thing that should have made it in the top 6, if not be like a broad number 1, is the character of Arcata. And for me, I know that's a complicated and nuanced thing. I keep bringing it up, but how can we protect our local business economy and the culture of our town in a time of great transition? I would like to please recommend that all of you give that some thought, because my fear personally is that we get a lot of people renting from a small number of people. The economic scarcity is created when those people can't put money into the local businesses that they might have if there was a little more competition in the market. And then we lose local businesses to more corporate franchises, which is kind of a disturbing thought to myself and I'm sure many other Arcata residents, as we've already gotten 2 more franchises in town when something I believe a lot of us have been proud of is the anti-franchise law. So how can we protect these aspects of our culture when they're a great change. Please consider that. We appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Go ahead, Jane.
Hi, thank you all for hanging in there this late. It's been very interesting. I think the process has been useful because it's allowed for public input as well as a variety of ideas, and you've sorted them out and pulled them together into topics and subtopics, which is good. I will hope you leave that discussion open to get input from the other two commissioners when they come back, so that they have an opportunity, so that when you start up next time, you have an opportunity to revisit this discussion, even if it's in summary form, and they have an opportunity to provide their input. I think it's also important to let RGA actually do a brief 10-minute talk through of their presentation, so that it's understood, because that was a multi-page presentation and Judith only seemed to have one page. So I think the entire thing was in the packet, but the detail that she was inquiring about was actually in the presentation and could be discussed before you vote one way or the other. So I'd like to see that opportunity be given. And I definitely think it's useful to understand the feasibility of the building heights by understanding what's really going on with soil liquefaction and sea level rise. So it's maybe premature to decide on building heights until you basically have that understanding of the feasibility and the implications of those two factors.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Chris.
Hello, Chris Richards here. Thanks for all your work tonight moving forward. It's good that you have made it through the process to the point where you will be reaching out for counsel to help staff get the additional help to get you the information you need. It would have been nice to have this happen long ago, but anyway, the process works the way it does. I really feel that the form-based code process is going to require a lot of funding and a lot of time, but you really don't want to put that in front of all of the basic work with all the decisions with discussions and topics that are up at the top of your pecking order there. So, you know, I think it's good that you can get some extra funding and start working towards getting that together for when you get to that. But certainly I hope you don't jump ahead with the process and start working on that before you get these basic details hammered out. And of course, it's good you're keeping the community involved with this. You can always do as much as you can, and the more you do, the better, obviously, to get the buy-in for whenever you get to some final product. So anyway, thanks again for all your work, and I hope my words help you with some clarity. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Colin.
Good evening, this is Colin Fisk with CRTP. You've heard me say before that density is key to healthy and clean transportation. I'm going to say that again because it's important and it's true. Of course, density or not, we can and we have to build safe and comfortable streets for people who are already walking, biking, rolling, riding the bus, because, you know, we deserve safety and comfort just like anyone else. But the research is clear that if we want significantly more people to choose those modes of transportation, density is a necessity. We can't just wish that away and say that we prioritize these low carbon modes of transportation while at the same time maintaining land use and zoning rules that enforce low development densities. It won't work. I've attended a lot of meetings about the Gateway Plan at this point, and I've heard people say they don't want tall buildings, but I've heard very few clear explanations of exactly what it is about tall buildings that's objectionable. Most of the concerns that were discussed tonight, for example, although it was in the context of building height, have no clear nexus with building height as a policy matter. And one that appears to have a nexus that has been discussed a lot, the technical feasibility, as I think you all know, as planners, is not really relevant to the policy issue at hand, because planning and zoning lays out restrictions and incentives on what can be built, but doesn't mandate building, and technical feasibility can only be assessed on a project-by-project basis, considering the details of the site and what's proposed to be done on it. So I would encourage you to support denser, taller buildings, and be very clear about the decisions that you're making, and please move along with this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, hi. So we keep hearing community development staff repeating the phrase conversion of L Street to a one-way road. Many of you guys might know this, but there's only an L road between 10th and 7th Street. So you can convert L Street to a one-way road, but it will only get you 3 blocks. It's not going to get you the other 7 blocks that get you from Samoa to Alliance. So we're only talking about 30% of the road is a conversion of L Street. The rest is all brand new road. So just, I hope you guys understand that. As far as construction impacts, concerns from the public goes that we heard of earlier, you have to consider that what happens in the EIR does not cover everything. I noticed this during the construction of the Creamery Row townhomes that went through the EIR process. There were concerns about contaminated soils on that site from historic uses. However, as I watched the equipment move around this dirt on a windy day, I watched the northwest winds blow all that dust to my neighbor's house and to Little Learner's preschool. It was so much dust that I had to use wiper fluid every time I got in my vehicle. It's a lot of dust. So I wouldn't put all your faith in the EIR as far as construction impacts, because you have to realize we're talking about impacts in real life, like potentially poisoning a preschool and surrounding residents. Also, the guy from Rocker just talked about how Gateway will solve the climate crisis, but isn't the crisis about humans living in the path of sea level rise? I mean, that's not the only thing, but that's a major concern of the climate crisis. And doesn't the Gateway Plan exacerbate that issue by putting large populations right in the target of sea level rise? So
Thank you.
to me,
Thank you very much for your
comment
comments.
sounds like a contradictory statement there.
Thank you for your comments.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry I had to tap out. I had to go home, but yeah, I think just probably just the main comment. I think Jane kind of clarified some things that were in the packet for Judith that elaborated a little bit more. And maybe if we do get the opportunity to share a little bit more, we can give some examples of how a topic work group could work. And we could choose one of the topics like sea level rise as an example that we can kind of walk ourselves through. To a lot of us from the outside, it doesn't make any sense to be constructing things in the path of sea level rise. That's not as a environmental advocate, that makes no sense to me to invest infrastructure into places that are going to be underwater in 30 years. And so we really need to kind of address that in a clinical way and make sure that we're not, we're kind of like focusing on all these details now, but if we can't build something there because it's going to be underwater in 30 years, groundwater level is going to be rising so that those aren't really feasible. We should figure that out now and identify those sorts of things. And these topic work groups could address that in a way that's transparent to the public. I'm just worried that, hearing that staff already has all this figured out, don't worry about it. We've got it handled. is not really building any trust with the community. And that's where the topic work group approach could be really helpful, because we want to solve these problems and not just let them fester and keep talking about them over and over and over again. We want to try to solve these things. So lastly, I was a little skeptical of the whole Slido process, but I think it was good just to kind of get some of these ideas out. And I think that I'd also like you to take a look at the table that we put together at the end of the advisory committee presentation that has a table of things that we've identified that
Thanks,
should
Scott.
also be considered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, if you could allow me just 30 seconds to address a couple of the comments that came up.
Please.
A couple repeatedly about, something that we said about the studies that are identified there. Your staff have gone through decades with some of these projects and been involved in multiple studies. We have the institutional knowledge around the work that we've done, to address these issues. And so when I say that, we believe that these issues have been thoroughly vetted at the staff level and we're comfortable with the information we're bringing forward, we also recognize that not everybody has that same institutional knowledge, which is why we encourage you to continue to have discussions around these topics and share with the public that institutional knowledge to bring people along. And so I think it would be wrong to characterize this perspective as saying that don't worry about it, staff has this figured out and you don't need to do anything else. What I'm trying to inform you and the public is quite the opposite. That your staff, your professional staff, every person that I work with in this city is working on so many amazing projects. None of that is getting highlighted or daylighted, through these conversations. And I think this is a good venue for doing that. So I just wanted to kind of correct the record on that. There's, maybe taken a little out of context. I also wanted to point out, because I think there's some confusion that Commissioner Mayer doesn't have the full RGA proposal. She has the entire packet. I think she referenced one of the pages, just to be clear.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I agree that I think I look forward to the opportunity of giving us all a chance to discuss the work and studies and experience of staff with the public being able to see. I think that's going to help everyone get up to speed closer to where staff that's been working on this for a very long time is. No more public comments.
No more.
At that point, I would like to move to correspondence and communications. Do we have any correspondence from Planning Commission members this evening?
I think we all need to think ahead about the dates that conflict with or in proximity to Thanksgiving and the winter holiday. And if everybody starts to wrap their mind around that, I think they're going to be asking us at the next meeting what we're going to do about it, if we're going to set up an alternate date.
Good reminder.
What that looks like.
Good reminder. Anybody else with any correspondence? Staff?
The only thing I wanted to mention is that this Friday, the Institute of Local Government Planning Commission training is happening, and so I want to make sure that you're all signed up. If you're not, please do so. You can reach out to me, and I can help you coordinate on that. That's all I have.
There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.